Mr Ward.
My lady. Our next witness and our first witness this morning is Mr Max Canduff. Could the witness be sworn, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Please state your full name for the inquiry.
Maximilian Cairnduff, but I used Max.
Thank you. And Mr Canduff, we're grateful for it. You've provided a witness statement to the inquiry. It's inquiry number 000536351. Can you confirm, and I believe you have done so by signing it, that it is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
All right. Thank you for that. Can I start, please, just by way of introduction of you, a little bit about your background? You started as a solicitor for a number of years at two city firms, is that right?
Yes. Technically, actually, I was an employed barrister rather than a solicitor. I'm not sure if that matters. But yes, I started out at A&O. Allen and Overy, I'm very sorry. I moved then to Sherman and Sterling, which is a New York-based firm, but I was in London. But I spent the bulk of my career at Freshfields.
And how many years were you in private practice there?
15 or more.
15. And you specialised, is it commercial law, procurement?
Not procurement, though. I was an infrastructure lawyer, so I was a transactional lawyer. So largely I negotiated international and domestic project financings. The UK ones did involve procurement, but I had procurement law colleagues who would assist with the technicalities.
You went on to specialise into procurement, and we'll come to that.
No, I did. I was never a procurement lawyer. I'm sorry.
Sorry, when you ceased to be a lawyer in July 2018, didn't you?
Yes, that's correct.
You joined the civil service.
Yes.
And you joined the government commercial organisation within the Cabinet Office.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And more specifically, you became a commercial specialist in the complex transactions team.
Exactly.
Yeah, understood. Then in 2019, you joined the senior management team within CTT.
Yes.
CTT being?
Complex transactions team.
Yeah. On the 1st of April of 2020, you were brought in to work on the PPE buy-sell, of which we've heard a bit in the last couple of days.
That's correct. I'd spent a few days previously helping build up a bench of contingent labour to assist with COVID-related activities, and then I was transferred over to the PPE buy-sell and the, as it's now called, the HPL, the high priority lane, on 1st of April.
You're not the only witness to whom this has been asked, and I doubt you'll be the last, but if we can try and keep the pace down, it will help our stenographer enormously. So you became the high priority lane and donations lead.
Yes.
Those two areas were amalgamated, weren't they? Donations and high priority.
That's correct, because both of them would involve potentially politically sensitive topics or require greater handling.
Yes, we'll come on to that. But you joined that team after it had already been set up.
Yes, it was set up. Well, I didn't know at the time. Sorry, I'll try and slow down. I didn't know at the time exactly when it had been set up, but I believe it was in late March, mid to late March.
Nor do you know, you tell us in your witness statement, by whom it was set up.
I didn't know at the time of my witness statement. I'd read a lot of other evidence in preparation for today. So I've seen evidence since where I think it's an Andy Wood statement where it suggests that Lord Agnew may have suggested it, for example. My impression, though, was it was more of an organic response to the flood of offers we'd already received by that point, and then the flood of chasers we were starting to get in relation to some of them.
You occupied your post at Deputy Director General level?
Deputy Director, not DG.
Deputy Director. And you occupied that position until around the 4th of May 2020, so just over a month.
Yes.
But a busy month.
Very. I'd actually remembered it as much longer. It was only when I was preparing for this hearing that I realised it was that short. In memory, it's several weeks.
Yes, understandably. Could we please have on the display, I don't know whether you followed yesterday's proceedings, the
only the
evidence that's given. Excuse me?
I'm very sorry, only the start.
Only the start. Could we have, please, it's a PHT reference rather than an IQ one. It's two parts of the transcript from yesterday's proceedings. I don't know whether it's part that you've seen. It's 0000151. if we could start at pages 181 to 2.
Oh, thank you.
And you can see at the top of that page some of the evidence that Mr. Marin gave.
Yes.
I'm trying to find the right word. Some people said noise. He's referring here to the VIP lane. I don't want to use the word noise. There was legitimate interest in, so we needed to manage that.
Mm-hmm.
I think as we look back on how we did this, we didn't do it in a good way at all. I mean, frankly, we've reviewed it several times. The Boardman review said this wasn't the right thing to do. And frankly, if we'd had a better process in terms of triaging the offers, as we talked about before the break, we probably would have needed this. I think that's a very valid observation. And Mr. Marin goes on, we've been tested in the High Court on this particular process, actually here that the unfairness in this very first stage was found to be unlawful, although actually our justice generally found that actually we would have awarded, she thought the contracts would have been awarded. You understand what he's referring to?
Yes,
there?
I do, yes. That's the Mrs. Justice O'Farrell Pestifix Iander judgment?
That is indeed.
Yes.
That is indeed. And in particular, the finding of unequal treatment,
yes.
Albeit that in that case, those particular contracts were found to have been ones that would have been awarded in any event.
Yes.
Yeah. And then if we could just move to the latter of the two parts of this transcript. It's at page 225. This is towards the very end of proceedings yesterday, where our chair comments as follows. I'm extremely grateful to Mr. Marin, to you and your colleagues for the work that you did, and of course for the work that you're doing helping the inquiry. I know you probably have to arrange, if we can go up a page. It spans over the 2 pages, 224 and 5. That's it, 224. I appreciate how hard you and your, next page. Thank you, next page. Colleagues must have worked during the pandemic and how distraught. I'm sure many of you are. I think you've shown signs of that this afternoon, that all your hard work has been undermined by the creation of the VIP lane. I hope you understand why we had to examine it. So I start with those observations. I just want to remind you of parts of your own evidence that relate to the VIP lane now, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you. The first of those is at page 6, paragraph 4.5, which is I&Q, the witness statement 000536351, where you observe, I was also aware at the time that there was a belief that the contracts coming through the high priority lane, 4.5, page over, that's it, would be of good quality and would lead to credible offers of PPE coming through in the otherwise chaotic market. Is that a belief that you held, that there is an inherent improved credibility of offer amongst those that came in through the high priority lane?
It depends when. So when I joined the HPL, I was, as it says in that quote actually, highly sceptical of it. I thought it was unlikely it would be a better route. You know, I thought the better offers would likely come in through the other route or just randomly. What I found in practice once I was working there, and this happened through 2 ways, was many genuinely good, high-quality offers came through. And there's a couple of reasons for that, I think. One of them is there were individuals such as Lord Feldman, who was actively tasked with going out and identifying offers. He did a very good job of it. And he would seek, for example, feedback on which referrals had worked, what had been potentially productive, which hadn't been, and so that improved the quality. that were coming through that route. The other thing we found was that some very credible suppliers, rather than just going through the portal, would go to a minister directly. So, for example, Apple were making a big donation. They went directly to government ministers. So that would then get referred to us. Or they'd go through the portal, not hear back, and then they would escalate. And so they'd still end up with us. So I didn't expect it to begin with, but it did become true that amongst a lot of offers that weren't very good, there was a substantial kernel of offers that were very good indeed.
So initial scepticism, but eventual support for the HPL. Is that fair?
Support to a point. Later on, towards the end of April, I think I recommend wrapping it up because I felt it was done. We were in the very early stages of the crisis. We had desperate shortages of PPE. We were all very aware of that. You mentioned, I think, to Gareth, there's two kinds of pressure. There's the pressure that's coming from ministers, but there's also the greater pressure of just seeing what's happening. So at that point, we're really focused on just getting kit in the door. Later on, as it stabilises, it's not the best way to do things.
When you say that we were done, you meant that sufficient quantities had already been secured?
I mean that, as it stabilised and we could see more reliable offers, more reliable supply coming through, more contracts had been placed, you're in a place where you're no longer in absolute crisis, where you're about to run out tomorrow, hopefully. And at that point, you need to start thinking about your structure. And as we go into May, we then start thinking about what the future will look like and what the future of PPE procurement will look like during the remainder of the crisis. Sorry, does that answer?
All right, let's move on to some of your other observations in relation to the VIP lane. At page 14 and paragraph 6.2 of your evidence, you say that I had almost expected us to be akin to sewage workers.
Yes.
And then you say clearing noise out of the system. Once we realised that some of it was pretty good, my confidence in the HPL increased. And I think that summarises what you've just told us.
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah. We then have at your paragraph 716 to 717, at page 23, an account of correspondence that you had with Mr. Moore. Do you recall?
I do indeed.
Yeah. And you said there, is it fair to say that you and David Moore didn't quite see eye to eye on the VIP lane?
Yes, I think I say in my statement actually, and David was correct.
Excuse me?
David was correct.
In what sense?
In that I pushed at the time. I was caught, I think, in tunnel vision. When you're there, you've got a mixture of good quality offers that are stuck in some technical assurance black hole from our limited perspective, and some which are incredibly noisy and may or may not be good. You don't know. But they're good enough to put through to technical assurance at any rate. They're stuck in the system. I said to David, basically, could you please get these unstuck? And by unstuck, by the way, that doesn't not necessarily mean pass. It means give a resolution to, which may be rejection. You might want to pull it up. I don't remember my exact words. But
from your statement or from the correspondence?
Sorry, either actually. It doesn't matter. I think it's quoted in my statement.
The statement, if you want to look at it, is it's paragraph 716 to 17.
Yes, thank you.
Page 23.
And essentially, David came back saying, we will not prioritise anything because it's in the VIP lane, which is absolutely right.
You, by contrast, Mr. Canduff, are saying an HPL case with merit should be given priority over a case of equal merit, which came in from another route.
All other things being equal, I think I said as well. Didn't I?
Yes, you did. You did say that.
Yes.
And you say further, which is a variation on that theme, if two leads are otherwise equal priority and one is VIP, some weighting to the VIP is helpful.
Yes.
Can I just understand from you why that should be the case?
Well, if you're asking me today, I don't think it should be the case.
No.
I think I was wrong. And David pushed back hard, and I never raised the point again because I was wrong. At the time, I was absolutely buried in an ocean of cases, none of which seemed to be progressing. I had cases that were older than the team was, to put it in that perspective. I was trying my hardest to get my cases through, and I lost perspective in the wider system. And that's partly why you have a wider system, is precisely because when you're there, up to your neck in the mud, as it were, you will sometimes lose sight of that bigger picture.
All right, well, that's, if I may say so, a very candid description of the experience that you had. You have told us nonetheless that you started with scepticism.
Yes.
And you ended up with less scepticism, albeit there came a moment where you thought that there should no longer be a VIP lane.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, can I just understand more closely from you, when your scepticism subsided, what did you see? Can we enumerate them as the reasons or the advantages of a VIP lane?
Yes, I set this out in actually quite a detailed email at one point, I believe. Let me try and break this down. Firstly, there had been a call to arms on 10 April, which is after the VIP lane is set up, of course, but prior to that, there are 2 appeals, one in Parliament, for people to provide offers to government, the result of which is a vast onpouring of offers. It's not something a commercial person would have done. So we're in a world where we have...
You regard the call to arms as regrettable because it produced a deluge of offers when there are already too many to triage. Is that fair?
Speaking personally, yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Carry on, please.
I think there'd be better... Sorry. Okay. You can ask me about that if you want what I prefer. So we've got that problem. We're deluged with offers. So you need something to handle that problem. At that point, people will have ministers, MPs and others, and other senior officials will have legitimate concerns where they hear about a case which on its face looks good, but which doesn't appear to be progressing. And so they will start chasing. And some suppliers, often not the best ones, but sometimes good ones, will actually contact multiple people to raise their concerns. You get 3 or 4 different ministers or MPs, each of them saying, why haven't you responded to ICMICOR or whoever? So that's a lot of noise. I know Jonathan doesn't like the term, but it is the term I used at the time and still do. The other reason, though...
So, sorry, can I just ask you in relation to that? So you see as an advantage of the VIP lane the ability it offered to manage the expectations of those that were seeking feedback and progress reports as a matter, in effect, of PR, public relations?
I wouldn't call it public relations. And also, I would say it's not the best way to do it. It's the way we had available to do it, which is a different thing. I say at the end of my statement, I actually think there's much better ways of doing something.
By allowing others that were not involved in the core task of procurement to deal with that. But let me just pick up the first half of your answer.
Please,
you wouldn't call it public relations. It's obviously not an activity that is central or that is core to proper, efficient, especially emergency procurement, is it?
No, but it's not just PR either. The example I had in mind on this, of where it's really legitimate, I think, for ministers to get involved, because I know the professor was quite critical of this, my lady. But we had a case where a Korean supplier contacted a Labour peer and said, my case isn't being progressed. And on its face, it was I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a high-volume, credible-looking case. The Labour peer raises it with Lord Bethell, saying, I don't know if your team have dropped the ball on this at all. I don't know if they've dropped the ball on just this one, or I don't know if it's an example of a systematic failure by your team. Lord Bethell then raises that through officials, so it comes to my team. I think that is correct, because actually that is politicians exercising legitimate oversight over official activity. That's why I don't like PR. It is legitimate, I think, for a minister to say, official, are you doing your job?
It placed additional stress on you and your team, did it?
Very much so, yes.
And that team was under terrific amounts of stress as it was?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. You were enumerating advantages of the VIP lane.
Yes, thank you.
You'd identified that one. Do you have others?
Yes. The better one is that, and again, there are better ways of doing this. This is the means we had available to us at the time. The other one is that some genuinely really credible offers came to us. And I mean, I didn't know this at the time, so this is based on reading, for example, the second corporate statement where Claire Gibbs goes into it. But most of the contracts placed, I understand, were with a relatively small number of large suppliers. We had some really good leads. People like Bunzl was one, 9 United was another. I probably shouldn't Should I be naming them or not, actually? I don't know.
Mr. Kendall, can I just ask
yeah,
you there?
please.
Sorry to cut across, but I do want to pick up this point with you. You may have received good leads through the VIP lane. Are you in a position to compare the prevalence of such leads within the high priority or VIP lane to those obtained outside of it?
To an extent now, I couldn't have at the time, because at the time I had no sight of what was happening in the other lanes particularly. I knew ours was sclerotic.
Well, let's deal with those in parts. At the
Yeah.
time and then now.
Yes.
At the time, your scepticism lifted, didn't it?
Yes.
But it lifted without an ability to make that comparison in and out of the VIP lane.
That's true, but there's a couple of things there. One is we're doing triage within the VIP lane. So when the offers come in, we look at them like other opportunities teams, and we say, is it for what we want to buy? Is it volume? Is it a credible counterparty? We look at those things. We do triage. At that point, we progress it forward. The rest of the system, and I know this has been challenged, but I do believe this bit worked. The rest of the system will then compare that to other offers and kind of, prioritise within that. But we're prioritising within our own lane on the basis of things like volume, credibility, is it the right stuff?
Performance.
Yes.
Performance of the contract.
No, not performance of the contract. I had no visibility of that.
Okay.
Most of them wouldn't have been placed at that point.
But there are various indicia by reference to which one can assess the quality of an offer as it comes in. And you've identified some of them.
Yes, and at the opportunity stage, it's quite a limited thing. And one of the things you're looking at, for example, is there's first a very basic check. Is it in English? Does it make natural language sense? Are the photos of what they purport to be? Really basic stuff. So that's one of your first things. Is it stuff I don't want to repeat myself. Is it stuff we want to buy, volume, all that good stuff?
Mr. Kendall, you said that at the time you didn't have an ability to make a comparison in and out of the VIP lane.
No.
You said that since then you have been able to do something towards achieving that
I've
analysis.
seen various bits of evidence in preparation for today.
Yes, and on the basis of that evidence, can you form a view as to whether the high priority lane did yield a disproportionate number of what you describe as very good offers?
My impression, to be honest, is yes.
It's only an impression.
It is only an impression, and you will have greater data, so I may be wrong. But my impression, based on a couple of things, I looked at that on your opening, I think it was, which I did watch, actually. There was a tornado diagram.
The funnels.
That's it, the funnels, thank you.
Yes.
Which shows why things drop out. And when you look at that, in the HPL, actually most things don't drop out instantly. Most of the offers we got pass a kind of a minimum credibility test. With the non-HPL lanes, a lot of the offers aren't even necessarily of PPE. They're people who filled in a web page. And actually, they drop off really quite sharply, really quite fast. I hadn't actually seen that before this week, but I think it did suggest that there were more credible offers. Then the other thing is I looked at Claire Gibbs in the second corporate statement where it talks about who the contracts were actually placed with, which I didn't know before, I think last week maybe. And actually they're placed with, 50% of them I think are placed with, I don't think that's stats to hand, but 50% of them are placed with a handful of really big suppliers, 80% with like 10 big suppliers, I think it was. So the actual HPL things that got contracts, none of which I knew at the time, went to a small subset of impressive-looking suppliers.
Well, Mr. Kendall, you're right that the inquiry has assembled quite a lot of data about this, and I'm going to invite you to comment on that in due course this morning. Can I, before doing that, you've identified advantages as you saw it of
Yes.
the VIP lane, what I described as PR, but you insisted is something slightly different to PR. You've mentioned the quality of offers that you perceived was coming in, or perhaps not at the time, but with retrospect, you understand to have been coming in to the high priority lane. Anything else by way of advantage that you perceived either then, well, both then and now, on the basis of what you've been able to look at of the VIP lane?
I'm trying to remember. I did send out quite a long email with a whole, which was called something like, "Why do we have a VIP lane?" I recall at the time.
This was at the time.
That was at the time, yes.
So it won't help us with making that comparison then and
yes,
now.
I see. Sorry, could you repeat the question there?
Yes,
Very
I'm
sorry.
asking you to enumerate what advantages you saw and see in the VIP lane.
Okay. So at the time I saw, I think, the ones I've chiefly set out, which is A, handling noise, and B, you have some really good stuff coming in there, and, it then makes sense to handle it.
All right.
Other ways of doing that. Now, I would say handling noise, I genuinely don't think it's a PR task. That's not semantics for me. It's about your response to ministers who are keeping you to account. I don't think that's a PR thing. But it is better done by non-commercial professionals, to my mind. But commercial professionals were who we had. And in terms of the other piece, it would be vastly preferable, I think, if instead of starting with a vast sack of offers, you're then kind of looking inside trying to find things, to sit down and be much more targeted and think, okay, SSCL has fallen over. Well, I heard from some of the evidence it may not have entirely, but as far as I knew at the time, it had fallen over. How do we go out now and proactively target? And eventually, of course, the rapid response teams were set up, and that was a much better methodology.
I was going to ask you next about that.
Yeah.
In what way was it better?
Well, firstly, the trouble with the multi-stage process, one of the good things about the multi-stage process is it allows the VIP team to act as a lightning rod for all that political pressure, so that the rest of the system isn't really kind of damaged by it. And I think it largely did that. But it's slow, it has multiple handoffs, and it leads to inefficiencies. So, for example, I've said we didn't know what things were getting awarded contracts. So let's say, and make up a supplier name, Acme again, have come through again for a third time. And I don't know, in fact, that they that actually their pricing was unacceptable and they were rejected. Well, I don't know that. So I now spend time assessing them again. So there's an inefficiency there. It's also multiple handoffs lead to delay. And in this extraordinarily fervid market, delay is fatal.
That's absolutely right. Speed is vital.
Yes. So the RRT, sorry, if I can use the acronym, is that okay?
RRT.
The RRT, by contrast, it brings together the various stages of the process. And by this point, we all are more sophisticated in what we're doing. I think Andy Wood speaks to this.
Without referrals, without...
Okay, sorry, yes.
The RRT, the rapid response team.
The RRT brings together the relevant people in one place where they can look as a group at an offer and try and progress it really quickly.
And without referrals and without demands for updates.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were saying for me not to refer to things.
No, sorry. No, there isn't the same...
Exactly. You take all of that out.
You take all of that out. You create a slick system that doesn't suffer from the problems of the VIP lane.
And updates, yes, and updates become less necessary because you've moved through things so quickly that actually you've rejected it or accepted it within probably a couple of days.
Is it not a model which could and should have replaced or substituted for the VIP lane?
Well, should, perhaps, could, no, I would say. There were significant backlogs of opportunities. There were already people handling things, and not everything was suitable for the RRT. The RRT was a limited resource. It made sense to use it for sorry, I'm speaking quickly again. It made sense to use it for the very best of the opportunities, regardless of lane.
Let's just rewind a moment, if we may,
Please.
Mr. Cundiff. This is no criticism of you. You arrived and the VIP lane had already been set up. Yes?
Yes.
For you personally to have made a recommendation such as that it be replaced with the rapid response team would have been quite a radical one to do, because it was already functioning, wasn't it?
Also, the RRT didn't exist then, and Chris hadn't thought of it yet.
It came to be created, didn't it?
Yes.
And it served a function akin to the VIP lane, but without some of the drawbacks of the VIP lane.
I think it's a bit harsh to say it was akin to the VIP lane. I think it was better.
It was better.
But I don't think we could have done it straight away.
Why not?
I'm not sure the organisation was mature enough yet. I mean, to put it in perspective, the whole cell of like 450 people was set up in a matter of days by people who are suddenly working from home with no prior warning. And back then, we weren't all set up for home working the way we are now. We were volunteers from Cabinet Office, Department for Education, Ministry of Defence. Our systems didn't even talk to each other much at the time. We didn't have a background in clinical buying, which, is worth exploring in its own right. But at that point, you've got to set up something which works and starts doing things. And actually, I think I wasn't involved in this. This is before my time. But I think the team did really pretty exceptionally, actually. When you think of them scattered there, some of them working from their bedrooms, setting up this whole thing in days.
But the noise to which you and others refer, implicit in the word noise, is unwanted sound.
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Rhys-Williams described it as a distraction. You'd accept that? It was a distraction. And to that extent, if not others, one would have preferred it not to have been there.
Yes.
Yes, all right. Let's move on. I'm conscious of the time.
Sorry.
Not your fault. I've been asking you questions that arise out of your answers. Just so that we can situate or locate the VIP lane within the procurement system more generally.
Yes.
It sat within the PPE buy sell.
Yes.
There were 4 routes by which an offer could be initiated: the online portal, existing suppliers, China buy, and then senior referrers through the VIP lane.
Yes, and make whether you count it or not as part of that. Yeah.
We've heard about the 8 individual work streams known as the opportunities teams, to which you've made numerous references today. And the VIP lane was one of the opportunities teams.
Yes.
And you, as you've made clear, were the VIP lane team lead.
Yes.
In charge of its day-to-day running, having taken over from Hannah Bolton.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Staffing, under Hannah Bolton, there were 3 full-time staff and 1 part-time member of staff.
Correct.
Yeah. Once you arrived, that increased, did it not, initially to 7 and then on to 12?
7, yes. 12 sounds right. If it's in my statement, it'll be correct.
And we understand from the evidence of Mr. Rhys-Williams that eventually it reached 38 individuals, 38 people working within the PPE buy sell.
It gets a little harder to measure because later on there are people, some of the work gets shared out with other opportunity cells.
Is it something in the order of that?
It's credible. I genuinely don't remember the exact size it got to by the end.
Okay, I hope it's not necessary. It's cited in Mr. Rhys-Williams' 3rd witness statement.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is when the PPE buy sell was at its peak at 580 staff. 508, I beg your pardon.
Okay.
By simple arithmetic, it therefore constituted 7.5% of the PPE buy sell, the VIP lane, at its height.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's fair to say, is it not, that VIP offers occupied because of the noise to which you refer, because of the demands for feedback, because of the giving of feedback, because of the iterative process that sometimes occurred within that system, more time and resource than offers arriving by other means.
More time and resource for the opportunities team dealing with them, for the VIP lane, not for anyone else.
No, that's what I'm referring to.
Yes.
For those individuals. And it follows, does it not, that there was, to some degree, an opportunity cost, therefore, because the time, the effort, the resource that went into VIP offers was not spent on those offers that came in by other means.
Yes, but I would say less opportunity cost than if we hadn't had something to channel those offers, because otherwise they would have popped up all across the system and more people would have been drawn into it.
All right, that's fair. I mean, just to put more numbers on it, there were approximately 24,000 offers in all, weren't there?
It sounds credible. I don't remember the exact number.
And if we're talking about 7.5% occupied by the VIP lane, that takes us to a figure of 1,800 approximately.
I don't think we had that many offers in VIP.
No, 1,800 offers that could have been processed by those staff had it not been for the high priority lane.
Oh, I see your point. Yes, but as I say, more people would have been having to deal with queries at that point, so I'm not sure it would have actually been helpful.
All right, it is a crude analysis.
Yeah.
We certainly know anecdotally what you tell us about a distraction and about the opportunity cost, and we know from the evidence. Perhaps we could show INQ 000512 297, page 4 of 11.
I think you mentioned that opportunity cost. I think Mr. Candace's answer was he thought there was one, bound to be, but it was lower than if. So I'm not sure he was accepting there was an additional opportunity cost.
I think that's right, my lady, but I would say there is an opportunity cost. It would have been higher if we hadn't had that, but if we'd had an alternative means of handling, I mean, Jonathan's right, I shouldn't really call it noise, but I'll be consistent. If we'd had an alternative means of handling communications and updates, you'd have dealt with the noise and you wouldn't have had quite the same opportunity cost.
That's back to the point about the rapid review team. Yep.
Or an alternative means of interfacing with seniors, stakeholders.
Thank you. And I think given that additional exchange, it's probably not necessary to go to this document. I'm going to move on to the purpose of the high priority lane in a moment, but I just want to ask, on the basis of the answers that you've just given, you experienced a degree of discomfort initially about a system that you inherited, so to speak, that you came into. Is it one that you yourself would have invented, that you would have created?
I don't think so, but I now have hindsight. So it's actually quite hard to answer. So,
well, we're focused on that. The inquiry generally is looking back and learning lessons from the experience of the past.
No.
Yeah. You wouldn't?
The only wrinkle is, and I've alluded to this a couple of times, you have the resources you have. So, because the way the nature of the civil service works and the government commercial works, it's really easy to reach out and get volunteers from Central Department Commercial. It's much harder to get volunteers from everywhere else, like NHS Commercial or comms teams or admin teams or whatever. So that's why, no, I don't think it's the best way to do it, because you create a parallel procurement line within your parallel procurement and you get into equal treatment issues, as Mrs. Justice O'Farrell found. But we had the resource we had.
Well, given that answer,
yes.
Are you in agreement with the comments that Mr. Marin made yesterday, that you were shown at the very outset of this morning, that, and he cites Mrs. Justice O'Farrell's judgment. He says that he wouldn't, it shouldn't have existed. He wouldn't, on a future occasion, it shouldn't be there. Would you agree with that?
On a future occasion, it shouldn't be there. I think it was quite hard to avoid on this occasion. But on a future occasion, yes, I can't see why you would remotely want to do that again.
All right. In terms of the steps that you took, Mr. Canduff, upon arrival at the VIP lane, you introduced a single email address, didn't you?
Yes.
And you did this because communications with senior so-called VIPs regarding offers was proving to be time-consuming and a distraction for the opportunities team's focus from good sources.
Yes. I was also concerned that without a central mailbox, if you have a central mailbox, one person could do part of a case and hand it on to someone else seamlessly. If you don't, if everything's flowing through me or Hannah or someone else and we fall over, which did happen to some people, you've just lost your continuity and you then potentially lose life-saving equipment.
Yeah. You were also unhappy about the name, weren't you?
Yes.
You wanted to change the name.
Sadly, I failed.
You failed to change it from what to what?
Well, it was originally called the, I think, High Priority and VIP Team. Lane is a term that comes in later because it's not really a lane. I thought the term VIP was really unhelpful. And it gave the impression, and I think this has been proven since, that the fact someone's a VIP makes the offer special, which is wrong. The VIP status means that you have to do more handling.
It's wrong as a matter of impression, or it's wrong that it should have happened?
It's wrong as a matter of fact, sorry.
Because you say that it wasn't occurring, that there was no preference.
No, sorry, I'm putting myself back in the time, I'll restate. The problem with the term VIP is it implies why you're prioritising is because they're a VIP. But triage occurs within the lane. So within the lane is just a way of handling offers that come through a particular route. Your actual prioritisation is still on the basis of volume, kit, quality, all that stuff. It also is, I thought subsequently, it would just, we've seen what happened with it actually. You know, there's now a narrative, I think, that a key part of the response was effectively cronyism, which I genuinely don't believe it was. But I think the term VIP, calling it the VIP lane, hugely contributed to that.
So when you say it was, when you sought to change it,
Yes.
it was because of a matter of optics rather than your concern that some advantage was being conferred by dint of who it was that referred a particular offer into the VIP lane.
Yes, but what I say there is I take you back to when you were asking me about some of my earlier comments. This is exactly the point in time when I'm most sceptical of the value of the lane. So I'm not expecting much of it to go to contract at this point. So yes, I'm seeing it then as a handling lane, essentially. I'm highly sceptical that good stuff will come through. I don't realise that until later. And so I'm concerned that the term itself is going to be, it's just profoundly unhelpful, which I think it was. I didn't think of the term, Gareth mentions if you called it inquiry lane, it would be much better. He's right, I didn't think of it.
Tell me, you've cited, and I've asked you a little bit about it, the judgment of Mrs. Justice O'Farrell, the PESFIX
Yes.
judicial review claim, and the finding within it of unequal treatment.
Yes.
That reveals something more than mere optics, doesn't it?
Yes, it shows that it shows you've breached equal treatment requirements, which makes it unlawful.
Yeah, so doesn't that suggest to you that in addition to the impression that was given by the use of the term VIP lane, there was something else, something more fundamental, perhaps something more important that was problematic about it?
I think there clearly is something more that's problematic, yes. I think that's been well established.
So the reason
But
I
if
ask
on
you
1
that-
April, on 1 April, would I have thought of that? No, because I wasn't expecting stuff to go through from it.
Well, I'm asking you with the benefit of hindsight.
Yes.
You've told the inquiry that or perhaps you were referring to at the time why you attempted a name change.
Yes.
But now, posing the same question with the benefit of hindsight, there was more to be concerned about than optics,
Yes.
wasn't there?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. In terms of the promotion of the VIP lane,
Yes.
an email initially went out to officials, including Mr. Rhys-Williams, and those working with him. And you mentioned Lord Feldman,
Yes.
also the private offices of Lord Bethel, Mr. Gove and Lord Agnew, from all of whom we will be hearing in due course.
Yes.
Yeah. They provided personal email addresses or their office email addresses,
Yes.
and they used their contacts.
Yes.
Yeah. And a particularly...
Sorry. If we're talking they, Lord Feldman used his contacts. I don't know what the others did particularly.
Well, I was going to say Lord Feldman was
He was an envoy, essentially, I think.
Yes, he was quintessentially drawing upon his many years
Yes.
of experience within the Conservative government and the contacts that he had acquired thereby.
And his business contacts, I think. I don't know him. I've spoken to him once, I think, but he did have wider business contacts too.
Well, we can ask him. I think it's next
Yes.
week, actually, that Lord Feldman will be joining us. That initial distribution clearly gave better opportunities for involvement in the VIP lane to those who were affiliated with or had connections with the Conservative Party. That's fair, isn't it?
Yes, but they were the government of the day.
Of course.
So who I was reaching out to was the government of the day. Had it been a Labour government or a government of another party, I would at the time have done the same thing, because you were reaching out to the people who were in ministerial offices who were the ones who were scrutinising your work and chasing for updates.
And had it been an alternative government, I'd be asking you the same question in mirror form.
Yes.
But my follow-up question to you is that it would be fairer, it would be more inclusive if that initial distribution or that initial invitation to feed in to the VIP lane be made more generally.
That's true, but firstly, I wouldn't have known at the time how to do that. I was already the people I reached out to were the people who were already chasing us regularly. That's why they were on that distribution. They were the ones who were chasing constantly for inquiries. I'm not sure, as a civil servant at the time, actually, I'd have had to kind of find out how you reached out to the opposition. I actually still don't know today how you would communicate formally with His Majesty's opposition as a civil servant working for the government. I actually don't know how that would work. But, yeah, it was primarily that was the people who were raising.
It's not beyond the wit of man to do that.
No, you can do it. Sorry, that was the other point I was going to make. It would have absolutely drowned us. Because what I was trying to do with that email was to dampen down noise. We're back to that point. We're already massively overloaded. We have far more cases already than we can process. The team are working 14 to 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Reaching out and saying, can you send me more, would have been, I think, a very odd thing to do. What I was trying to do was dampen down and kind of calm things. Saying, please send me lots more, we wouldn't be able to do anything with it.
Save that, a successful offer results in a very significant contract, doesn't it?
Later, but not at that point. At that point, all that's happening is that every offer that comes in, none of them are successful.
But you will have known that by inclusion in the system, you stand a chance of securing an important contract at the end of it.
Yes.
You will have known it. And for that reason, I understand what you're saying about deluge. As a matter of fairness, inclusion in that process should be made more generally.
I think that's right, but I think if we'd done that, the whole thing would have fallen over.
All right. I now want to take you to some remarks that are made by Professor Sanchez-Graells. I think you may have heard his evidence.
I did hear a fair chunk of his evidence, yes.
You heard a fair chunk of it. Could we display, please, I'm hoping that you have the inquiry document reference, because I'm not sure I do. It's, thank you, 539153. And the first reference within it is page 104, para 292.
Yes, he says there, if this is represented the more general understanding of VIP lane, I'm not sure it was.
So, yes, I'm just going to invite your comment. We've touched on this because you spoke to earlier about the advantages, as you saw it, of the VIP lane. 292, let's just go back to 292.1 if we could.
Yep.
There we are. It's been stated that VIP lane offers were at the same time.
Oh, thank you.
Route 2 offers, in the sense that according to Cabinet Office, all companies referred by ministers, MPs or senior officials had already applied via Route 2 or were told to complete the web form as part of processing their offers. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't think that. Sorry, what is Route 2 in this case? I don't think that's correct, though. They hadn't. If they'd all been told, well, they may have been told to complete the web form. Many did not complete the web form, and some would have seen that as inappropriate. It's very difficult with an international global corporation to say, who's approached a Minister of State to say, could you go please and fill in a web form? It's not realistic.
Route 2 is an accelerated route. We saw yesterday during Mr. Maron's evidence a slide that identified A or B, A plus B or C where
Yeah.
C, I don't know whether you followed that.
No, I don't remember that.
A plus B were references to the quantity, the size of the company offering, or the quantity of PPE being offered. And C is VIP status that would accelerate progress through the offer process.
I don't know where that comes from, but
Okay.
they certainly weren't accelerated through because I was working there and it was very, very slow.
Let's turn to 292.2.
Sorry, just on that though, that said, I do remember an email exchange with Darren where he's saying to someone...
Mr. Blackburn.
I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Blackburn. He was saying to somebody, don't put this over to the HPL. If it's a high quality offer, it will get picked up by the triage teams and whizzed through the system. Might not be his exact words, but it's pretty close, I think. That was my understanding. If it was a really good offer that hadn't come to us, it would whiz through the system to be picked up by the other sales triage, which is the same as our triage, of course.
All right, let's move down to 292.2. Here we are.
Yep.
First bullet, end of. In my view, says Professor Sanchez Graels, in my view, however, there is a clear difference between providing assurance that offers were being considered and progressed by communicating the organisational arrangements of the PPE buy-sell on the one hand, and providing specific updates on the progress of specific offers to the specific referrers on the other. You accept that in many cases what was fed back or provided was the latter?
Yes, and there is a clear difference. I don't agree with his next bullet, however.
All right, let's look at the next bullet. Rather than dedicating resources to answering these requests for updates, the PPE buy-sell, DHSC or Cabinet Office would have sent general communications to referrers explaining those organisational arrangements and asking them to refrain from chasing, as well as setting up an automated response from the dedicated mailbox, making clear that the offers were being processed and asking offerers and referrers to wait for a follow-up as part of the standard operating procedures. You've said you don't agree. Why not?
Because I don't think it's appropriate that when a minister, potentially prompted, as in my example earlier, by a senior member of the opposition, comes to their officials and says, what is going on with this? I've heard you're dropping the ball. You give them an automated response, or you say to them, here's our organisational structure, leave us to it. And let's say, for example, in that Korean example, in fact, that offer was not a good offer, and we went back and rejected it. But let's say it had been a really good offer, and actually we had dropped the ball. We had missed it. Maybe we were systematically missing them. We would have gone back and said, no, Minister, don't worry, officials are on it. It's not for you to look at it. And we would have failed. You know, ministerial oversight is part of the system. And yes, I think all officials would say sometimes it's easier if you don't have ministers directing oversight. It's still right.
You make the point yourself, Mr. Canduff, that there's no equivalent of the VIP lane that you've come across in the past or abroad.
Well, abroad I only take from Professor Sanchez Graels, his evidence. He does an international comparison where I think he finds
which you've adopted, you've included in your evidence.
Okay, I forgot that, but yes, I agree, it makes sense to me.
Yeah. He says that all of this is down to ministerial deference. I
disagree with that.
You disagree with that?
Yes, I think what creates it is there's the call to arms, which isn't what creates the VIP links, it's after, but it is symptomatic. And then previously in March, there are two basically public things saying, come in with all your offers. It's kind of, I think someone at the time called it the Dunkirk spirit or something. It's like, bring it all in. I don't think others did that. Now, I can't know for certain, the professor will know better than I will, but that's where, for me, things flow from. Because then you're drowning, then you have people chasing you up, then you need a means to deal with people chasing you up or it slows down the whole system, and then you're in this world. And I think here, the professor is right as a matter of kind of strict procurement practice, but procurement practice isn't the only thing that's important in these situations. And there's a bit where the professor puts this list of things to take into account, and notably what it doesn't include is saving lives, which is what we really cared about.
Mr. Canduff, I just want to finally put to you a number of points that relate to your diminishing scepticism.
Yes.
Your observation about the number of good offers that arrived via the VIP lane.
Please.
And what I understand within that to be your your growing assumption that a disproportionate number of better or more credible offers would arrive by that means. Is that fair?
No, sorry, I wouldn't say it was a growing assumption. It was a growing belief, I think based on what I was seeing at the time, that we were getting high quality offers. At the time, I had no way of comparing how many we were getting compared to others, but I knew we were getting very good offers that genuinely merited following up and would provide
But
good
unable
stuff.
to compare them to those offers
Yes.
obtained elsewhere.
So that's why I was challenging. I wasn't assuming they were better. I was believing, based on what I was seeing, that we had good offers worth pursuing.
Yes. Difficult, though, to perform that analysis at the time or even
Impossible.
since without the data and
Yes.
the evidence that the inquiry has. You've observed that speed is vital, that the
Yes.
faster you can progress through the system, the better your chances of securing a contract.
Yes, I think in almost all cases, Gareth had a small exception, but it wouldn't come up very often.
Okay, that's helpful. And that technical assurance is a bottleneck. It's a point that Mr. Blackburn and you both make.
Yes, I mean, it's necessary, but yes.
The VIP lane had its own technical assurance, didn't it?
Partway through, and so I believe, from what I've seen from the org structures I've seen, did say the China team and some of the others. So I don't think that was just us. And that wasn't something we asked for. I think what that was about was someone you could contact to say what's going on, what's happened to this, is it being reviewed? And I think, and again, this is based on what I've read preparing for this, because at the time I wouldn't have known. I do believe that other cells and other routes also had their own means of doing that. I don't believe we were unique in that.
Let's move on then. Could we have INQ 000 475 005? Now,
Oh, yes.
this is, you've referred to the material that the inquiry has available to it that wasn't
Yes.
then available to you, that even more
I've seen
recently
this.
hasn't been
Yeah.
available to you.
Yes.
That includes 36 witness statements from referrers.
Yes.
And we'll move on to caseworkers in due course,
Yes.
of which you regarded yourself as one and included a response.
I didn't regard myself one, but I thought it would be unhelpful not to reply to the survey.
Indeed, we're grateful for that response. 36 of the referrers. Of those 36 referrers, 67% of them, or 2/3 of them, had not conducted any due diligence.
No.
So 2/3.
Nor would I have expected them to. It may be
To
on that.
put it
I
into
don't think-
figures, 24. I know that the chair was keen to have that as numbers. That's 24 individuals.
Okay.
Nor would you have expected them to, but nor would you therefore say that an arriving offer had any, on this basis at least, inherent improved credibility or solidity.
It may on two things. Most will not. There are two exceptions, sorry. If someone has looked at it, then it is probably English language, basically coherent, and it is for PPE. So that's an incredibly minimal threshold. But that's only if someone looks at it. Now, many will just have been flipped over with no one looking at it. The other scenario where it will be more credible is if it comes through and it is, Amazon, which actually was a real example, then the fact it is Amazon with their logistical reach is inherently likely to be more credible. Plus, you already know they're probably not going to struggle with the financial covenant. So for the majority of offers, you're absolutely correct. But there are two subsets where I think that's not quite true.
All right, let's move on. I'm conscious of the time,
Sorry.
Mr. Candaff. I'm sorry if I have to. INQ 000 582 366, page 4, paragraph 1.5. I'm looking at another measure of the inherent credibility or solidity of an offer,
Yes.
performance. How did the contracts perform?
Yep.
In and out of the high priority lane,
Yeah.
within the same given period. And this one, once it's available, 582 366, will show that high priority lane offers experienced a higher rate of contractual performance issues than non-high priority lane ones. Don't know if you saw that slide yesterday.
I did see it. It was 50-something to 30-something?
Yes,
something like that.
55 to 39, well remembered.
Thank you. I didn't think, well, there's a couple of things there. I wasn't sure how useful this was, but you'll form your own conclusions, of course, because It could be, for example, that the problems that arise in the non-HPL ones are all quite minor and the problems in the HPL one are all quite major, in which case it's actually worse than you're suggesting. It could be the opposite.
We simply don't know that detail.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure how much it actually told me.
Well, we went into this yesterday, but as I suggested then, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander.
Yes.
We're looking in general terms at HPL and non-HPL.
Yeah.
Let's move on to speed.
Yes.
One of the reasons why speed is crucial is the guidance that I think you had a hand in drafting that said if an offer is more than 2 weeks old, it should be rejected.
Correct, because if nobody's picked it up by 2 weeks in that market, it's probably not very good.
Okay, fine. That deals with that point. In terms of progressing offers, we've dealt with that. Can we just go back to INQ 000475005 and page 2, which shows another donut diagram of referrers seeking updates for high priority lane suppliers.
Yes.
And I don't know whether you're able to comment on this based on your experience within the VIP lane, but we see here that 61% of those referrers did seek updates.
Yes, I suspect this may be to do with your 36 group, because actually I would have expected the percentage to be smaller. A lot of people didn't seek updates. It's just that when people do, it creates quite a lot of noise. I was actually slightly surprised it was as high as it was. Your greater problem is with when people see multiple updates or a supplier contacts multiple points in the systems that 5 different people are all chasing slightly different times. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not really disagreeing with it.
Not disagreeing. If the cohort size was larger, you're saying that you might have a different percentage there.
I'd guess it would fall a wee bit personally.
All right.
But it's still quite a lot of noise.
Let's have a look at it through the other end of the telescope.
Yeah.
From your point of view and your colleagues' point of view. As you know, the inquiry was provided with the names of 20 VIP lane caseworkers and surveyed 17 of them.
Yes.
The results of that, if they could be displayed at INQ 000581-860. I'm just going to look at 2 aspects of the results of that, if I may. Firstly, page 9. From which we learn, when it comes up, that 53%, there it is, of HPL caseworkers were contacted by HPL referrers directly.
Okay.
Again, that presumably doesn't come as a great deal.
No, that doesn't surprise me.
And then I see we've got the second one up now. Question, do you consider contracts in the HPL were treated differently through the process to contracts awarded outside of the HPL? To which 66.7%, which is 10
Yes.
in terms of individuals, said yes. 26.7, which is 4, said no. And we didn't get an answer from one of them. You answered this, didn't you, Mr.
Yes.
Candoff? What did you understand speed, due diligence, assessments or valued for money to mean in terms of different treatment of offers?
I actually can't remember right now whether I said yes or no, because I can see you could answer either. I think if you take the whole chain, I think it's no, because they go through the same process steps at each stage. They go through the same triage process. They have to go through technical assurance, closing, all of that process. So overall, I don't think they were. Within, however, that initial contact, clearly they are. Because instead of going through a web form and having your details there and then having someone contact you based on the web form, instead you have an initial conversation with the caseworker, which is different. I don't think that made a difference, as it were, but it is a different form of treatment. This is what takes us back to the judgment, I think.
So you, Mr. Candoff, may have been amongst the 4 that said no to that. Can you help us in relation, because it's your team, in relation to those that said yes? What was understood by speed, due diligence, assessment of value for money as different treatment?
I would guess people were talking about speed of the initial pickup.
I.e. that an HPL offer would be handled more speedily
initially, the first contact, so that's quite important. So obviously I don't know what people had in mind, but the same due diligence steps applied, the same assessments of VFM applied. So if anyone said yes on that, I think they were wrong. If what they're thinking about was speed, then the initial contact, you're trying to get in touch ideally within 24 hours. We often failed, but you're trying to get in touch within 24 hours. This is where you get to potentially an equal treatment problem, because you've got that initial contact, which is quite rapid, and that may then help you kind of get on the ladder, as it were. That's, I think, potentially, if I were saying yes, that's what I'd have in mind. I don't think that then influenced the overall outcome, but I guess that's what they were thinking about.
Well, that might give you an initial speed advantage. Chasers or requests for feedback might chivvy an offer along.
Only if it had got stuck somehow. So by the point it's being chased and chivied, it's already getting delayed.
And a separate route for technical assurance might also offer some form of speed advantage.
There wasn't a separate route for technical assurance. Sorry, that's quite important. Early on, it's the same technical assurance thing for everyone. It's the same team. It's a group team. Later on, we have a dedicated person who applies the same processes, so we have a point of contact so we can find out what's going on. I don't think that's the same as a separate route.
All right. Finally, I'm not going to go to a chart, and I'm going to pick up this in greater detail with Mr. Hall. There is a concern about a figure of a 17 times conversion rate between offers and acceptance. You would accept that a 10 times conversion rate between offer, comparing a VIP lane to non-VIP lane in terms of prospects of securing a contract after an offer being made?
Yes, and I think if you look at that funnel diagram, as you called it, I think that helps explain why. And I think also the evidence from, I've mentioned it before, the second corporate statement, which talks about 50% of them were with like 5 really big contractors, is also why.
Mr. Cairndorf, those are all the questions I had from you. Thank you very much. I know that there are some questions for you from call participants.
To start with, we've got Mr. Weatherby, who's just there. Mr. Cairndorf.
Thank you.
Thank you, my lady. Just this, Mr. Cairndorf, I ask questions on behalf of the COVID bereaved Families for Justice UK.
Yes.
You've told us that the VIP lane was set up largely because of noise and that it was an organic response to need.
Yes.
Do you agree that the lack of structure or plan in relation to the VIP lane at its creation meant that there was therefore no plan or guidance in place for consideration of how to deal with pressure from ministers or indeed the potential for conflicts of interest through the VIP lane?
Sorry, I might need to unpack that a little. Actually, could you break that down a little for me?
Yeah, so what I'm getting at is you've described it being set up
Yes.
In the moment as a response
Yes.
to the situation that you had because there was no other alternative way. So what I'm putting to you is that does it follow from that the lack of a structural plan for the lane itself necessarily meant that there was no plan or guidance for the team in respect of how to deal with pressure from ministers or indeed the potential for conflicts of interest through this process. And I'm picking that up largely from Professor...
yes. Well, I think there's a couple of things there. Firstly, we were... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We were the plan in that sense. But if you're looking at future crises, then it is worth thinking about in peacetime what the plan is for circumstances like that and how you deal with that. I've addressed this at the back of my statement, actually, in part. So it's worth thinking about that. I think it's a bit unfair on the team who set it up to say there was no plan because this was them thinking about it and putting something in place. It may not have been the best thing that could have been done, but in the circumstances, I don't think there was much better. In terms of conflicts of interest, that would be picked up later in the process.
Yes.
Sorry, does that answer?
Well, I mean, I'm not actually wanting to be critical in this question. I'm just trying to elicit the point that it's set up in the moment.
Yes.
Was there, in fact, guidance of pressure and conflict of interest for your team?
No. But there was a senior civil servant, i.e. me, put in charge of it.
Yes.
So in that sense, you know, I was able to give guidance to my team and I was that buffer.
Yes, so there was supervision, but
yes.
Guidance. Thank you. That's all I ask.
Thank you, Mr. Weatherby. Mr. Thomas. Oh, no, it's not. It's Mr. Dale. Sorry, Mr. Joe.
Mr. Carnduff, I represent the Federation of Ethnic Minority Healthcare Organizations, or FEMO. And just by way of context, I should say that in times of crisis, such as the pandemic, we understand you to be saying in your evidence that the urgency to deliver solutions often requires rethinking traditional procedures and protocols.
Yes.
And the establishment of the high priority lane, or HPL, is one such example, which requires an adaptive response designed to expedite procurement processes during what is described as a public health emergency. Mm-hmm. However, the rapid implementation of these measures raises questions about the balance between expedience and adherence to established standards,
yes.
Particularly concerning equality and inclusivity. So given these reflections, FEMO and similar organizations would like to know how considerations like the public sector equality duty were integrated into these expedited procurement processes, if at all. And so my precise question is, you observe that the circumstances leading to the setting up of the HPL were not normal, and you observe this at paragraph 4.5 of your witness statement.
Yes.
Assuming you did consider that public emergency conditions existed, did you take this to mean that the HPL team need not have had regard to the public sector equality duty and or other equality duties in PPE procurement?
No, I'm not, well, I could be wrong on this, but I'm not aware of any exception from public sector equality duty obligations by virtue of an emergency. Now, I could be wrong on that, but I'm not aware of one. I would expect it, however, to become more manifest when you come to choices about the distribution of PPE rather than the buying of it. The PPE itself is, I think, I may be wrong, relatively agnostic. A mask is a mask. How you then distribute, I think, then becomes very much a question of who is being impacted, and issues like that. For example, bus drivers were an at-risk group at the time because they had to deal with the public still. Buses were still operating. I don't know about the public, the equality kind of diversity makeup of bus drivers as a population, but, that's where you'd have to think bus drivers are exposed. How does that measure against nurses? That's way beyond my competency, but that's where I would expect it to come in.
I think the problem is that Mr. Dale's probably getting at is that a mask isn't a mask. Unfortunately, I've heard evidence that not all masks fit all faces.
No, that's true. It's also an issue with gowns, where, for example, a large gown won't fit a lot of people.
Precisely, as my lady says, the question is really getting at how were these considerations managed or integrated into what we now know as the accelerated procurement processes?
Got you. I think this is an area where there is room for improvement. One of the things I say in my statement is we didn't have access to people who are experts on PPE. So that meant, in that sense, we're buying kit by reference to guidelines we've been given. I think if it had been possible, which I don't know if it was at the time, I wasn't very cited in this part of the structure, to build in greater knowledge of the equipment and how it was used, and ideally clinicians, to be honest, who'd have that lived knowledge, I think then that would probably better address the point I think you're making. I'm not sure that we were equipped to do that because we simply had specs and went out to buy those specs. I think it's the point of, are the specs the right specs and are they comprehensive, is probably where the differential impact would come in. Does that make sense?
Directionally, yes, but I think we make up with that line with other witnesses. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Carnduff, those are all the questions we have the time being, although I think I'm
Yes, I'm
seeing you again
back
later in this module. even those who criticise various aspects of the procurement process, I don't think I've heard anybody doubt the extraordinary commitment and dedication that people like you and your team had in trying to get the necessary PPE. So thank you for all that you did in that respect during the pandemic, and thank you for your help to date in relation to the inquiry.
Thank you.
Very well, I shall return at 11:30.
All rise.
Mr. Sharma.
My lady, the next witness is Darren Blackburn.
Put your right hand, please, Mr. Blackburn. Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Take a seat.
Okay, we haven't kept you waiting, Mr. Blackburn.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Would you be kind enough to state your full name for the inquiry?
It's Darren Blackburn.
Mr. Blackburn, you have provided the inquiry with one witness statement. I wonder if you'd be good enough to confirm that the content of that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief.
I can confirm that.
Mr. Blackburn, you have a long career in procurement in the private sector between 1999 and 2019, working for BAE Systems and PwC, amongst other companies in the private sector. And then you joined the civil service in September 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You joined then as a deputy director in the Cabinet Office Commercial Function Complex Transactions team. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes, correct.
And on the 19th of March of 2020, you were deployed to the from the Cabinet Office to the PPE cell.
Correct.
And then in April of 2020 to July of 2020, you were the head of the new supplier team.
Yes, that's correct.
And subsequent to that, you have returned to the private sector. Is that right?
Correct.
Mr. Blackburn, we heard yesterday from Mr. Maron about the experience of people such as yourself working in the PPE cell, the stress and the strain and the hours that were worked. Could you help us with that, please? At the beginning and during the tenure, what was it like?
I mean, in the very first week we were deployed, I was actually taken ill and had to isolate myself. So I was doing a lot of Teams calls, etc. And it wasn't until the second week that I was fully deployed. And so I missed some of the setup. But even from the isolation of our own sort of bedrooms or offices or wherever we were working, you could see the sort of the intensity and chaos of what was going on around us. The pure need to get PPE, vital PPE into the NHS was sort of paramount. We were working long hours under intense pressure with a lot of scrutiny, just trying to do the best that we could to try and get that vital PPE.
You have referred in your witness statement to two of your roles being solving problems and unblocking bottlenecks in the PPE cell. Could I take each of those in turn, please? From your vantage point in the new suppliers team, what were the key problems that you encountered or that you could see from the processing of offers?
I mean, one of the key issues was identifying those good offers with which to take forwards. If I can put into context what we were getting, of the 15 to 16,000 supplier offers in the system, of which there were multiple offers, they fell into three categories. One category being, a little old lady who had offered to make masks and drop them off a local hospital. We'd got organisations, factories if you like, who closed down and had furloughed, who were offering to provide excess stock of PPE in its thousands. And then you'd got the intermediaries where we were offered the quantities that we wanted, but you had to find them in and amongst the 15,000. And one of the areas that we were criticised for early on was the speed of which we were getting contracts in place. So that was one of the key issues.
And secondly, in terms of the bottlenecks in the process by which those contracts were being considered by you and your team, where were the principal bottlenecks that you identified?
So I think I set it out in my witness statement, and Max confirmed it earlier in his statement also, was predominantly around the technical assurance of validating the offers and the certificates that we received to make sure that they were fit for purpose and met the specification and standards.
From your vantage point as the head of the new suppliers team, you could see offers being processed through what I might call the general route and also via what has become known as the high priority lane. Could I touch, please, first of all, on the high priority lane? What did you understand was the purpose of the high priority lane?
The point of the high priority lane was to address some of the criticism that we had around not processing and getting contracts quick enough to get high quality, valuable PPE into those trusts. So the point of the high priority lane was a way of expediting those good, credible offers.
You refer in your witness statement to another purpose to the high priority lane to be to deal with noise. Is that what you're referring to just now, or is that something different?
That's another aspect of it. Yes.
Forgive me.
No, that's another aspect of it, yes.
When you refer to noise, what exactly are you referring to?
Requests for updates and an understanding of where offers were within the process.
So the high priority lane is serving two functions. It's looking at the most credible offers on the one hand, and it's also considering the noise or the feedback requests which are being generated.
Yes.
And are those two concerns, are they competing concerns? Are they competing for time?
Yes, of course. If you're responding to a request for updates, you're not dealing with a supplier and trying to progress their offer.
Turning, please, to guidance about which offers were and were not referred into the high priority lane. Was there any guidance which was available to you and your team as to which offers to refer into the HPL?
At the time, I don't believe there was.
Given that there wasn't any guidance, what criteria, if any, was applied by you and your team to decide as to whether an offer would go into the HPL or not?
So I can only speak for myself rather than my team. But in my mind, those offers to go into the high priority lane were offers that were credible, offers of an in-demand product, and offers that were of large volumes.
And what about that second category, the offers for which updates were being sought? Was that another factor that contributed into whether an offer would go into the high priority lane or not?
From my own perspective, no.
Were there, in effect, gatekeepers to the high priority lane, people whose job it was to decide whether or not it would be referred in?
Well, ultimately, Max would have been the gatekeeper to what went in and then how that was prioritised or allocated amongst the team.
You speak in your witness statement about the speed at which offers in the high priority lane were processed. Do you have anything to tell the inquiry from your vantage point, looking at the new opportunities team as a whole and the high priority lane in particular, as to whether there was an advantage of speed in the HPL?
I can't say categorically yes or no. We didn't do any analysis at that time to record at the time in which processing started in either lane to get in a contract. So we just didn't have that data or measure that.
Was there any way that you perceived that high priority lane offers were treated differently within the new suppliers team?
So in terms of the process that they went through and the due diligence that they went through, it was all exactly the same. I guess the difference would have been in the handling and the more direct communication and the fact that they were, I guess, prioritised over some of the other offers.
What do you mean by the handling and direct communication?
As in the individual caseworker may have given them more face time, if you like.
And of course, is it right that that individual face time that the caseworker was giving to those offers in the high priority lane were resources which were not being devoted to other offers, which were otherwise being considered by the new suppliers team?
Well, there were other caseworkers that would have been handling those other cases.
So a specialist team of caseworkers simply to deal with that aspect, the handling aspect?
Yes.
Did offers in the high priority lane have a dedicated caseworker attributed to them? And was that something which was available in the general lane?
In the high priority lane, there was a dedicated caseworker that would have overseen the case as it went through the process, as I understand it.
And was that the case in the general opportunities team as well, or not?
I couldn't say for sure. I don't think so. I think there were more handoffs in the general case team.
What do you mean by handoffs?
Well, so if you lump the processes into three areas, you've got opportunities, technical assurance, and then closing, where the contract was formed. Between those three elements, there were handoffs.
I want to ask you some questions, please, setting aside the high priority lane and just focusing in on one contract, which is the contract with iander. I wonder if we could bring up, by way of introduction, INQ 000575086. This is a schedule which has been produced by the Department for Health and Social Care. I wonder if we could have a look, please, at row 18. This is the information about the iander contract. Reading from left to right, iander capital. I wonder if we could move to the right. 29th of April 2020 for face masks. The original contract value, £252.5 million. New buy, we keep scrolling across, high priority lane, yes. And then source of referral, NHS Shared Business Services. But the person who received the referral, you're named there as the person who received the referral in. Is that right?
That's correct.
Could we continue to scroll to the right, please? A little further. And just underneath there, under explanation of the issue with the contract, DHSC rejected goods. Could I take you through a little bit of the chronology behind iander Capital? When the offer first came into, or to your attention, it was under the name Prosper Mill, wasn't it?
That's correct.
When the offer came in, you took an interest in that contract. What was the reason for that?
It had been referred to me by an ex-colleague from BAE Systems who are now working in the NHS in Manchester.
What did you think about the terms of the offer, about the goods which were being offered, about the price at which it was being offered? What attention did you pay to that?
Not a huge amount of attention. That was part of the process of checking the offer and the credibility of the offer as part of the wider due diligence. Not something I would have done.
The offer was being made by Mr. Andrew Mills, who was a senior advisor at iander. Could you help the inquiry with this, please? Who was Mr. Mills?
He was the person that was referred to me by my ex-colleague from the Manchester Trusts.
On the 13th of April, Mr. Mills contacted you by LinkedIn, didn't he?
That's correct.
Did you respond to that contact?
No, I didn't.
Mr. Mills followed up with you in 3 other communications on the 14th of April 2020, the 15th of April 2020, and then the 16th of April 2020. Is that right? You can take it from me that the dates are accurate from your statement.
Yes.
I wonder if we could please bring up 534943. And scroll to the bottom of this email chain so that we can read upwards. Next page, please. These are the initial communications between you and Mr. Mills. Mr. Mills has provided the details of the manufacturer, a summary of the offer, and various other documents. When you receive a referral such as this, are you making any assessment at all about the material which he's showing to you before it goes elsewhere?
Me personally?
Yes.
No, I'm not.
Scroll upwards, please. And then at the top here, on the 14th of April, Mr. Mills says to you, I'd like to make sure I've got through to the right place. This is an opportunity for HMG to get exclusive access to the entire manufacturing capacity of Zende Medical Co. for an initial period of 12 weeks. This is an email, forgive me, this is an email from Mr. Mills to Martin Kent. Who's Martin Kent, please?
Martin Kent was a senior official in the Department for International Trade, with which I think Andrew got connections with.
It's right, isn't it, that Mr. Mills was previously an advisor to the Department of International Trade?
That's correct, yeah.
He's referring, I think, to communications he's had with you, and then he's also making Mr. Kent aware that both the French and the US governments are circling, so that there was a risk, wasn't there, that this offer might go elsewhere?
That's correct.
If we scroll up, please. And there it's confirmed by Mr. Kent, 3rd line down, that Andrew is a former advisor to the Board of Trade when it sat under the former Secretary of State. Could we scroll up, please? This email then reaches your inbox about the fact that the company iander and Mr. Mills have been, it seems to be, vouched for by somebody at the Department for International Trade. What factor or what role, if any, did that play in your decision to refer this contract into the HPL?
From my perspective, it gave confidence that this was a person or an organisation that was used to dealing with HMG and therefore was trustworthy. I think for wider context, if I may, I'd worked on another case with one of the other caseworkers over a period of 2 weeks that we ended up rejecting because of the credibility of the deal and the fact that person in question wanted payment into their personal bank account. They were operating from a flat in Knightsbridge, etc. So we'd spent 2 weeks dealing with that opportunity for it to go nowhere. In this instance, we were keen to find credible offers with people that could be trustworthy, and this gave confidence to that. In normal times, during a procurement process, you would look for evidence of, if you were running a procurement, you would look evidence from the organisations that were bidding of their history and experience of working with and around government and delivering what it is you need them to deliver. And that is what played out here, in that background and history of working with and being credible in government.
Could we please put up INQ 000536359? This is your witness statement, Mr. Blackburn. Page 30, please. And paragraph 85. On the 27th of April, Andrew emailed saying that while he had submitted the offer under Prosper Mill, he would be using Iander Capital, and that was a company of which he was a director, because they had the infrastructure for international payments already set up. He was a board advisor for Iander. The due diligence had been undertaken on Prosper Mill, which returned an amber rating, and on Iander, which returned a red rating. And then you go on to say that a red rating did not mean that a contract with Iander could not go ahead, but it did mean that careful thought had to be given to contractual terms to minimise the risk. And then you refer there to the demand for type IIR masks at the time and the value of the Iander contract, and so it was progressed. I appreciate it's difficult sometime after the event, but a number of factors are being weighed up, I assume in your mind and in the mind of others, about whether this contract progresses. On the one hand, you have the Iander offer being vouched for by the Department for International Trade. You have the fact that masks are in demand, and then you have this red rating. Could you talk us through how those three factors were weighed up by you when the contract was referred into the HPL?
Well, we didn't know it was a red rating until after it started through the process. And so the red rating came much later on, rather than at the time of me referring it.
Of course, so that's because the due diligence was conducted much later on.
That's correct.
Right. But given those three factors, that it's been vouched for by the Department for International Trade, the red rating, but the demand for masks being critical, could you talk us through what would have gone through your mind as an experienced procurement professional weighing up those three factors?
Well, let me just talk to the red rating, which I think is probably the most important part of the question, what you're looking for. The red rating was an indication of there being risks in the commercial deal. These risks were around the size of Iander and its P&L and its accounts versus the size of the order that we were looking to place through it. And so that red rating was around its ability to handle that size of contract. And therefore, there's an element of risk in that. And in those situations, what you have to do is weigh up those risks, determine any mitigation, and whether those mitigation points would give assurance that you could effectively put the contract forward. And that's the same in normal times and what we were dealing with here.
What effect, if any, did the fact of the emergency play on these kinds of decisions being made? Because unlike, of course, in business as usual procurement, when you may have the benefit of time,
yes,
in these circumstances, choices and decisions have to be made very quickly. What effect did that have?
Well, that's correct. I mean, two aspects I think you just raised is we needed to get critical PPE into the NHS, and time was of the essence. So we did have to make decisions rather quickly. Again, we looked at the risks, determined what the risks were, and quickly put mechanisms in place to address those risks, and that's what we did here.
Now, the contract was entered into, but if we've seen on the DHSC schedule, as it happens, the goods were rejected. And the reason that they were rejected was because they had ear loops rather than head loops. And I think you set that out in your statement.
Yes.
And so it had been approved through the 8-stage process. It had received technical assurance. The contract had been paid, I think, about £252 million. And it's an example, isn't it, of a contract apparently being complied with, but the goods not meeting the specification.
I think the goods did meet the specification, but the specifications changed over time. So the goods did meet the specification for which they were contracted against. But as we learned more, those ear loops, I think, were uncomfortable. And so then the requirement changed to a different type of mask.
Could I ask you, please, taking what you know about the iander contract and what I've been asking you questions about, I appreciate hindsight being 2020. What reflections do you have, having been at the head of the new suppliers team and looking at how the iander contract turned out, about what could and should have been done differently?
I mean, at the time, I'm not sure anything could have been done too differently from what we did. Time was of the essence. We needed to get PPE into the NHS. We were doing all that we could. Things were set up quickly. People were working long hours trying to get deals in place. And I think, as Max alluded to, and I even say in my witness statement, it felt like we were doing it for years, not 3 or 4 months. It felt like a very long period. And as we learned more, we reacted to those things. And you'll see in my witness statement and in the supporting documentation, i.e. the handover document that we produced, of how we learned and changed things and tried to respond to sort of external factors. Of course, if we were starting from scratch today, and hopefully what we set out in the handover report helps the inquiry with that, we may have set things up differently and done things differently. I think given that we'd got the deluge of offers, 15,000 suppliers, we did what we could to try and filter and get contracts in place. I'm not going to question whether the call to arms was the right thing to do, but I think going forward we might not have done that, and we might have had a different strategy and a different structure around that procurement activity.
We'll come on to that and the handover document that you very helpfully referred to in your witness statement. Just before I leave iander, to focus in on one aspect of it, the vouching for of Mr. Mills by another official within the Department for International Trade. Do you think that appropriate weight or too much weight was given to that? Or do you think, again, drawing on your experience as a procurement professional, whether that was the right thing to take into account?
I think it was appropriate weight. I think it was a good thing to take that into account, but it wasn't the only factor with which or why the contract was awarded. Mr. Mills and iander didn't get a contract because of their links to DIT. That was a factor as part of the wider due diligence process, which included going through opportunities, technical assurance and closing. And ultimately the clearance board.
And of course that's one of the findings of the High Court, which you've referred to in your witness statement. Mr. Blackburn, just to look at the high priority lane before I leave it, just for one or two more questions. It might be very easy for lawyers such as myself to step back from the emergency that you were dealing with at the time and apply and ask for these principles about transparency and governance and so on. But we might be forgetting the extreme pressure that you were under at the time. Do you think it's possible, again, drawing on your experience as a procurement professional, to comply with those principles of fairness, equal treatment, and so on, even during an emergency?
As a procurement professional, then, and speaking on behalf of my wider team, it was something that we were all aware of and we were trying to do. But I guess the nature and the way that we're set up, someone somewhere was going to have more of an advantage over someone else because of the number of offers that we got. So you had to apply some form of prioritisation to find those offers. That prioritisation could have been alphabetically, in which case iander may have still come out sort of top versus a company called D or whatever. All down to volumes. There would have been some prioritisation and someone would have got a contract quicker than others and therefore being deemed to have been at an advantage. That was the nature of what we'd set up.
If you were designing a procurement system for an emergency in the future, an emergency which I, by its nature, can't describe, but if you were, would you include the same features of the high priority lane as we had in this country during the pandemic or not?
It's difficult to say exactly. It's difficult to say absolutely not, but ideally you wouldn't. I think it would depend on the sort of the wider structure of the operating model that you were looking to put in place. And as I say, we might have done a different operating model, one akin to what we set up from July onwards, for a more category-based solution.
When you say
and more targeted.
Forgive me, when you say category-based, do you mean category by category of PPE?
Yes, so in this instance, the subcategories of PPE, so the masks, gowns, gloves, etc.
And there was a moment in your answer in which you paused before you decided, what is it? What's the deciding factor in your mind that causes you not to rule out a high priority lane in its entirety? What feature does it have in your mind that is required in an emergency?
I think at that point in time, that high priority lane was just another form of prioritisation. So where I talked about, you're going to have to prioritise. If you've got 15,000 offers in the system, you have to do some form of prioritisation. And in my mind, that high priority lane was a form of prioritisation and trying to get that PPE into the hospitals.
Otherwise, you place the emphasis on the high priority lane, not the VIP lane.
Exactly, yes. For me, the VIP bit was the sort of the handling of ministers, etc., as opposed to the handling of the case.
In your experience, has there ever been a time at which the market was as volatile as it was during the COVID-19 pandemic? Forgive me, and I mean any procurement market.
Not that I recall, no, not in any of my sort of dealings. I mean, over the years that I've been in procurement, the things that I've sort of focused on has changed over time. I'd see PPE as a commodity item. There are different facets of procurements. There's directs and indirects, and typically PPE would be considered an indirect commodity item, if you like. And I don't have deep expertise in procurement of commodity items in such a way. So if you look at my career history, I've bought stuff like, propulsors and things for submarines. There was never an issue or a market as volatile as that. So no, not in my experience.
Mr. Blackburn, you refer very helpfully in your witness statement to a handover document, which I think you describe as the beginnings of an emergency procurement playbook, something which you didn't have in the new supplies team or elsewhere at the time the pandemic struck. I wonder if we could bring that up, please. Thank you. You were one of a number of contributors to this document. Page 28. Thank you. There are a number of recommendations and observations which you and others have made based on your experience in the PPE cell and in particular in the new suppliers team. The first, if I can touch on please, is under IT. The initial web form design, and you've referred already to the effect of the call to arms on the way in which it was possible to analyse and triage the offers that were coming into your team. Could you help us, please, with how you would have reformed that process or how you could reform that process in the event that a call to arms was necessary? What would you do to change that web form process?
Again, putting it into context of where we were at the time, we were trying to set up systems, processes, and procure PPE all at the same time. Some of the difficulties that you would have in preparing for such an eventuality in the future is, and some of the things that we had to change was having those fields that weren't free flow text, but were sort of pre-populated that you can pick from that allowed interrogation of the data. That would be difficult to preempt going forwards. The next emergency situation might not be about PPE. It might be, I don't know, something completely different. It could be about sanitisation, and actually it's less about PPE, but just keeping everywhere clean. So, you would need a different set of cells, etc., within your web form or within your sort of portal in order to address some of the things we've got here. So I think having a system ready to go is a good starting point. And having the ability to make rapid design and changes to any such input forms that would allow you to do the data interrogation that has been spoken about.
I think what you're referring to, if I may, is a structured data approach.
Yes.
So the way in which the data is structured, which Professor Sanchez-Grael's referred to
Yes.
in his report, that having an approach to that which is not too prescriptive, because as you say, you can't predict what the next emergency may be.
But consistency of input. So, I don't put in 10M. Someone puts in 10 0 0 0 0 0 0.
So rather than it
so
being,
consistency of data.
yes, rather than it being free flow, there's some structure to it.
Yes.
Next, if I can consider with you, please, system linkages and interfaces. It says there were no direct interfaces between the various systems in use. Mendix, DHSC, Finance, Uniserve's One World, which was a supply chain software.
Yeah.
And so manual workarounds were needed to be created to ensure information was available to all teams. And then on the right-hand side, we need a clear understanding of the end-to-end data needs at an early stage in the programme, rather than working through each stage in a linear fashion, i.e. understanding opportunities and technical assurance technical assurance needs before clarifying the needs of closing and logistics teams. That's a bit of a mouthful, but could you help us please with that? What problems were there with the way in which data was being accumulated and shared and processed as between the various teams in the new suppliers team, but also making up part of China Buy and UK Make?
And again, for wider context, a lot of organisations, even in the private sector today, still grapple with this, with numerous systems as their organisations evolved and they bought different systems to suit different problems, and then getting those systems to talk to each other. That's not unique just to this. That still applies to private sector today. A lot of organisations, as I talked about, they evolve. The organisation evolves, so they buy a system to meet a current need. In this instance, we would have, because opportunities and technical assurance were the first part of the process, we would have been looking at what does the system need to do to get us through those hoops, rather than thinking about the end goal and what is the information we would need at the end, and making sure that those early stages, everything was covered. So all of the information was asked for was covered at the end. Also, you've got, as we talk about, the different systems for different stages of the process. So you've got the Mendix system, which, if you like, is your source to contract system. So identifying opportunities and taking them through to get a contract. Then you've got the DHSC system, which is a purchase to pay. So once the contract is in place, you raise a purchase order, and then the supplier is allowed to invoice, and you do your three-way matching. And then there's the Uniserve tracking. So when the item is being produced, it leaves the factory, where it is in the world, be it shipped or what have you, where it is in the UK. So that tracking of those items through. And sometimes it's difficult to match and marry up. So if you take iander, for example, I don't know if there was a unique reference number that allowed iander to be tracked from contracts through to the purchase to pay through to DHSC, other than the word iander.
So forgive me, what you're saying is that there needs to be a system which, at least in some way, matches up all of those three systems together so that they interlock and they talk to each other.
Yes, you've got some form of ability of tracking the data and the data flow through the different systems, whether that be an overarching system or some form of unique identifiers and commonality of data through them.
Now, I'm going to mention something which was being used by the new opportunities team, which is the Excel spreadsheet into which lots of the offers were being entered. And at the beginning of the pandemic, that was the way in which data was being processed, wasn't it?
Correct.
And that Excel spreadsheet, I wonder if we could bring it up, please. It's INQ 000 534 813. I won't go through each of the categories of data here, but if I can just demonstrate how large this spreadsheet became. Row 1, I wonder if we could scroll all the way down to row, I think it goes up to 55,215 rows of information.
I've got the point, Mr. Chairman.
And if we could scroll the other way, please, 25 columns. Just in this single spreadsheet alone, and again, placing this in the context of the emergency and the pressure that everyone was under, this amounts to nearly 1.4 million individual pieces of data, which are being accumulated and managed and triaged. And it wasn't until sometime in April, I think mid-April, that access to Mendix was obtained.
Yes, the 9th of April.
9th of April. Using this must have caused you and your team enormous stress. Inputting data into this on a daily basis and trying to keep up with the information that was coming in.
Certainly for the team, yes.
It was at the very least suboptimal until Mendix came online. What did Mendix do?
Mendix was more of a case management system, so designed to handle cases and keep it all consistent in sort of one place that was easy to interrogate and get information from. You're sharing spreadsheets around, you've got a risk of data integrity and things being incorrect, whereas at least in Mendix, people are accessing it and the data integrity should be better and a more consistent completion of the data required.
And then much later on, or a little later on, in the summer of 2020, after Mendix, the case management system, it moved on to another system called Atomis.
Yes.
Could we bring up, please, 477254? This is a screenshot of what a more advanced data management system than both Mendix and, of course, the Excel spreadsheet that we started with. You, of course, didn't have this at the beginning of the pandemic. What effect would it have had if you had this sort of data and analysis available to you at the beginning?
So I'd need to look at the data, etc., that this is sort of showing and how you interrogate it. But it would have given us, if this was capturing all of the offers sort of made, it would have allowed us to have better visibility of those offers and the volumes of those offers to help with the prioritisation of weeding out category 2 and 3. By category 2 and 3, I mean old lady offering to make masks out of ex-husband's shirts and factories just providing excess stock. So it would have allowed for better visibility of what the offers were.
And this is, of course, only one screenshot from that system. And as you say, it presents the data at least in a graphical format, but you can at least see in a single, simple picture, the volume by purchase status, the volume by type, the monthly volumes which are being accumulated, and so on.
Correct. I mean, in the very first weeks, it was just by gloves rather than nitrile gloves or any other sort of variant of glove.
Mr. Blackburn, thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.
And I don't think there are any core participant, any Rule 10.
There are.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Blackburn. Thank you for your help for the inquiry, and obviously thank you for all that you did. I don't know if you've heard me thank your colleagues, but whatever criticism has been made of the system generally, certainly you and your colleagues can't be criticised for your dedication.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, well, are we ready to go to the next witness, or do you want me to break early for lunch? Ready to go?
No, break early.
Oh, break early for lunch. Sorry. Very well, I shall return at 1:25. All right.